Hey guys, Cade Wilcox here, host of the Primitive Podcast. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode where we hosted Blake Buchanan, the CEO and one of the co-founders of Bahama Bucks, which is now a really large franchise. Just a fascinating story of tenacity and stick-to-itness. As one example, they only had 20 stores in the first 20 years and then have since exploded. And so it was just a really great conversation. I think you'll really enjoy it. As always, thank you for listening to the podcast. Please share with your friends and help us grow our audience. We really appreciate you. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you joining the Primitive Podcast. And I'm really excited to have you because, everyone, if you're from Lubbock or the area, knows exactly what Bahama Bucks is, right? Especially if you have little kids. But that's kind of all I know about you, that you started Bahama Bucks. And so I can't wait to hear more about your story and learn a little bit about leadership from you. So for those who don't know who you are, why don't you just start by giving a little bit about your background and your story, and then we'll dig into, how you started Bahama Bucks and all that fun stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Kate, thanks for having me, by the way. But yeah, my name is Blake Buchanan. I'm founder and CEO of Bahama Bucks Franchise Corporation. And incidentally, it started right here in Lubbock, Texas. I was a sophomore at Texas Tech University, looking for that summer job, read just one ad, saw a guy selling his shaved ice equipment and thought, man, I'm going to start a snow shack here. That'd be really fun. And so, back in the day, it's really interesting because at the time we built this, what we considered a massive snow shack, because in the day it was huge. It was 240 square feet with a drive-through and parking and, AC in a bathroom. So it was like, wow, this wonder, right? And now I look at that and, that's the same size of one of our walk-in freezers now. Yeah. So it's just a tiny thing, but it really was a story of adventure. We, like a lot of businesses out there, there's a lot of ups and downs and valleys and peaks to our story. And, our story is really one of tenacity. It is really sticking with something for a long period of time and just being passionate about what you do. So it's a lot of spit and grit. And one thing most people don't know about Bahama Bucks is our journey. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. So I'll save you the math. I was 20 when I started. I turned 50 this year, so it's a big milestone year for us. It's a big adventure year for us. But, it's an interesting journey, and it's full of just, neat lessons along the way. But, the one that most people overlook is they look at where we are now and the nice corporate headquarters and the support center and all the franchisees we have and shops, from Puerto Rico to California. And they're like, wow, overnight success. But the first 20 years, it took us 20 years to get 20 stores. So I burned my 20s, burned my 30s, just chasing a dream. And when I turned 40, we opened our 20th store. And so it really is one of those where you really press into your family, you press into your friends, and it really gets gritty because you got to know who you are, what you're built to do, and what your passions are, especially as a leader and as a person. So, it's a fun story, but I wish it was someone else's, but it's ours, right? So,
well, there's so much to jump into there. When you started it, when you were 20, what did you anticipate? Like, did you just see it as a summer job and then you'd graduate and you'd move on to finance or healthcare or whatever you were interested at the time? Number one, so what were you kind of anticipating or aspiring to other than a summer job? And then at what point did you realize, okay, this is what I'm really going to pursue?
Well, man, both great questions, because initially it was a horizontal move for me. I'd been mowing lawns with my brother since I was 10 years old, and we had now put trailers and trucks and crews together, and so it was kind of a big thing. But I was like, I'm going to try this other adventure, and it really was a way just to get through college and get a little extra spending money and all that. And so I thought it was a fun idea. Now, in 92, I graduate, take a stockbroker position out in Phoenix, Arizona. So that's what took me out there.
Okay.
And it really takes your first real job to realize, oh, wow, I really liked what I was doing on that other one.
Right.
So took on my business partner, Eric Lee, who's a college buddy of mine, and my father, Tom Buchanan, joined the ranks with us. And we just looked at it. And I got to tell you, Cade, as a young 22-year-old entrepreneur, I thought, I would have 100 stores in, my spiel to them was, give me 3, maybe 4 years, we'll have 100 stores. And if you do the math, you're like, oh, wow, that's amazing. And little did I know, it took a lot more than just wishing and hoping.
So did you grow up in an entrepreneurial home? I mean, you mentioned that you had started mowing lawns at a very early age and you had crews and trucks. So like who or what fostered that kind of entrepreneurial spirit in you?
I think it was just the experience, really the idea in our family is to always be adventurous. My father was somewhat of an entrepreneur as he was doing insurance agencies and things like that. But the real desire came as just a young kid when you're trying to figure out, hey, I like sweets. I know where 7-Eleven is, but I don't have any money. And so we just knock on doors and say, hey, can we cut your grass? Can we sweep the sidewalks? What can we do? Earn $5 and go blow it on Slurpees and, Kit Kats or whatever. And so it really was this desire as a young age of you just weren't employable. And so you had to get really creative in how you were going to make money. And I think it just that adventurous spirit and also that inventive idea of let's see what we can do and just go for it.
That's cool.
And so really I would attribute a lot to my parents. They always encouraged that. And I think most of it was just to get us out of the house.
Yeah, that's good. Understandable. You mentioned it took 20 years to get to 20 stores.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, why? And what were some of the key things that happened along that way? Because what you have now, that seems almost unbelievable. Right? And so I'm curious as to what, economic factors or maybe it's a whole host of things, but could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's an interesting story, and it's one that when asked to share, it's always, you kind of got to, check your heart and go through it, because there is a lot of, tenacity and passion, but also a lot of heartache in it. Life happens between your 20s and 30s. We have 3 amazing young boys, but we also had a miscarriage. My wife had cancer. We lost a home in that process. We've had to sell cars and all those things. But I would say the hardest part was really chasing this dream. And don't get me wrong, you would see it do well. And then something would set you back and you'd see it do well again. And it was just the life of an entrepreneur, so to speak. And one of the interesting moments is there was a tragedy that happened to my business partner, Eric Lee, and he's a great man. His wife was killed in an auto accident. I mean, unexpectedly. They have a 9-month-old sweet little daughter, and now things go topsy-turvy on us. And I just remember looking at him, and I said, Eric, we're going to do whatever it takes to keep you here, but we want you to take a year off. We're going to keep paying you, but take a year off. Now, here's the problem. There wasn't enough money to feed any of us. But that's where we made a commitment, because he is a brother, he is a partner, and we said, we're going to keep paying, we're going to do whatever we can to make it work. And my dad was very gracious, and my mom, they had offered to our young family. We had 3 boys at the time. They were 6, 4, and one just turned 1 year old on his birthday. And they had a small guest house in the back of their property, a little 2-bedroom bungalow, and we were like, hey, can we move into the guest house? Now, as a father and as a husband, we know to mark our words well, right? So I was so full of pride. I'll never forget looking at my sweet Kippy. That's my wife. And I was just like, Kippy, this is strictly temporary. And with all the pride I could muster, man, I grabbed the hands of my kids and we walked in and moved into this tiny house, and we had sold our home, and we really were going to eat the equity. And that's what it took to get through that season. Now, again, you're going to have a lot of life happen. You're going to invest back into your company and invest back into your company. And the real meaning behind that story to our family is, we have now a saying in our family is, you better define strictly temporary. Because my 6-year-old, when we moved in, great guy, when we moved out, I grabbed him and we went and got his driver's license.
Oh, man.
So we were there 10 years.
Wow.
Trying to make this dream work. And so, but you could see glimpses of hope, and the store would do great, and it was just amazing. But now you're going to have to invest, and you got to capitalize things, and you're going to have to get more inventory and buildings and things like that. So you're just always throwing it back into the business.
Wow, this I can already tell you right now, it's going to be one of my favorite episodes. I have so many questions.
Yeah.
You mentioned like you would kind of see progress and you'd kind of see success, and it would kind of keep you going, and then you would reinvest.
Yeah.
So beyond seeing its potential and getting kind of tasting a little bit of the success, why, like during those 10 years, for example, you moved in, he was 6, you moved out, he's 16. It's 10 years. It's really a long time.
Yeah.
What kept motivating and driving you forward instead of going, you know what, I'm going back into private equity or investing or whatever. Like why stay the course instead of going another direction?
Well, I think part of it is Bahama Bucks is really my namesake, right? Buck is short for Buchanan. And so I had awarded franchise to people and made commitments to them saying, hey man, I'm going to be here. We're your support. We're going to get through this together, come, high or low,
right.
We're going to make it.
Right.
And so first you have that. It's a trust, it's a commitment, it's a promise. And so you want to make good on that. The second half was, and this is the other half of the story, I was doing second jobs. I was taking third jobs. I was doing everything I could to keep it rolling. And I think, when you really look at it, there's something in you where you just know, you're like, okay, we're going to crack the egg. It's there. You see it and you keep seeing it. And part of it was we weren't really chasing money. We were more chasing a dream and a desire and really our calling. And what we felt our calling at Bahama Bucks was always to bless our guests. And we could see that. We could see guests coming into our shops, having a great time. They would enjoy these mini vacations. And it was all about serving them and creating these magnificent moments that they could have memories with. And it just restored them and regenerated them. And you just saw, wow, this is really a need where we are. And so it was just these little safe havens that we'd put out there. Bahama Bucks would open, all the kids and adults and college kids would hang out there. And it was just this funky little vibe snow shack that we kept opening. So we just loved it.
That's amazing. So what happened after year 20? So you really put in a tremendous amount of effort and faith, and grit, as you've mentioned, those first 20 years. You get to 20 stores, but then something kind of takes off.
Yeah.
And so what happened then? Like why such a dramatic shift?
A lot of it is market exposure. All of a sudden you put shops in bigger cities and bigger towns.
Okay.
And, anything from Phoenix to Dallas to Houston to San Antonio, you start opening in these markets and other people start seeing lines and they're like, hey, I want a piece of that. So I attributed it a little bit to, the old American Idol when, just a guy's been singing in a bar for 20 years and now gets a little exposure and people are like, wow, he's good.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened.
Okay.
People started trying the snow. They started tasting it and said, wow, there's something different about this. And that's where it just tipped. People just started realizing what it was. The product was great. The staff, our Avalanche crew were fantastic. And we had fantastic franchise family fully committed to the brand. And so I think when you look at it, it created a little synergy. You had the right teams. You had the right people. You had the right locations with the right product. And all of a sudden it just started growing.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. Was there a moment where you realized, no pun intended, that the snowball had started finally rolling? Yeah. That after 20 years of effort and commitment and energy, was there a moment you realized, okay, it's about to take off, or did it just kind of happen to you and then you reflected on it, or what did that feel like?
No, we saw it coming, and we did. And I'll tell you, the saving grace to us is we had 20 years of a great team putting together processes, putting together systems. So we had this really deep foundation. I mean, really deep foundation. We knew who we were. We knew who we are. We knew what we were after. We knew how to handle guests and guest recovery. So we had all these systems in play, from marketing to field operations to IT and all this other things that we now support our teams with, to really be able to hold and grow. So if you think about it, it was really deep roots, and all of a sudden everything else just started growing. So I think that's what really helped fuel the growth. Is we weren't surprised by it. We were able to handle it, and we were able to, open stores and do them well and put the right people in the right spots and continue to just see the snowball effect, if you will.
It's really profound. This is an overgeneralization, but a lot of times you'll hear organizations that grow really, really fast and then come backwards to build that deep foundation you're talking about. And you had the luxury and benefit of really having a deep foundation that was able to support growth. And not that I'm an expert, but that seems like the right way to do it.
Yeah.
Because you have a culture and you've established all those values and the team and the processes. And so it makes a lot of sense and why you're kind of ready to absorb all that growth. How do you see your role as a leader? And it may be a tricky question because, your role as a leader inevitably has changed over the last 20 or 30 years. 20 years ago, you were, kind of doing everything like everybody else, right? So maybe speak into how you see your role as a leader now. And what does that look like for you?
And you really are insightful, because early on as a young entrepreneur, you're all things to all people and you're wearing every hat. And I think One thing we've done well throughout our Bahama Bucks family is we really understand roles and we understand goals. Everyone in our corporate organization, everyone at the support center, they understand their role and they have specific goals. And we work with a lot of strategic deadlines, and we're making sure that happens. But I think what my role now is, we look at kind of the seat I sit in. There's really several things that I oversee, and part of it is making sure we put the right people in the right seats. Very cliche, as I understand that, but however, teaming is such a huge thing. But not just bringing in the experience and all those type of attributes, but it's also what is their skill set. Anytime you do anything on a team, you need multiple people to, take on a task, and as we're opening stores. And so you have to have all these giftings and talents. And so really, as a CEO now, my role is making sure I understand their gifts and talents, but making sure they understand their gifts and talents so that each department doesn't frustrate each other, that we have clear lanes to run in, and that everybody knows their strength set and what they're able to do. For me individually, what still energizes me is I'm still very inventive by nature. I love being on anything new coming out, anything like that. I'm really good at the inventive side of things like that. Now, I always bring the tenacity, so I want to see it go all the way to market. But the other things that I've realized is there's a role for me too in fixing things that are broken. So I love the inventive side, but I love fixing things that are broken. And that's usually relooking at a process, relooking at something that's not working like it once did, and mainly because it's got a lot of inventive, characteristics to it. How do we solve problems? And I think most leaders understand that. The seat you sit in, you're just constantly solving problems, and you're looking at creative ways to do it, either through different team members, through different processes, or grabbing new skill sets.
It's really good. Thanks for sharing that. Is there a process for you as a leader, like for these things, like specifically whether it's inventing new products and getting to contribute to that, or whether it's fixing problems? And what I mean is, do you have a process, like how you organize your week, how you spend your time, that specifically focuses on those things? Or is it more kind of spontaneous, and you solve problems as they come to you, or you you tinker with things and invent things as it comes to you? Like, what does that look like?
I wish it was a scheduled thing. That would be so, hey, I'm going to be really structured here to get inventive. Usually, most of the times you're inventive, it's because a problem or challenge has come towards you. Something you didn't expect, something you didn't see, and now it's time to either pivot. Much like COVID, which everyone in America had to say, okay, we're going to adapt, we're going to pivot. What does that look like for us? Didn't schedule a lot of time for that, although it took a lot of time, and all of us cleared our schedules to figure that out.
Right.
So I think it's a blend of both. What I do now through my week, I do allocate on Thursdays just 2 hours where I'm going to study, where I'm going to read, where I'm going to look. But that's only part of it. One of the things I think is having a bit of discernment. I'm a huge people watcher. I love seeing trends and just how people interact, what the shifts are in the marketplace. And I think just having kind of a tuned sense of awareness really helps you if you're inventive in nature. And what I mean is, you got to understand what problems exist or what you're trying to solve before you can really create something.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. What's your time look like with your leaders? So how many employees does Bahama Bucks have?
So at the support center, we have about 55.
Okay.
Coast to coast, we employ anywhere from about 2,500 to 3,500, depending on the season.
Okay. So very helpful. So what is your role for your core leaders that are then helping lead the organization? Like, what's your time with them look like?
It's interesting. They're called directors. We have 10 directors over 10 distinct departments.
Okay.
And I am with them every Monday morning. So we're going to have that. We also have our quarterly offsite meetings, and then we'll do an annual as well. But those are kind of, the core of Bahama Bucks that go out and say, okay, how do we execute? How do we train? What do we do here? What's the problem? How do we fix it? But we've got this really tight core. Now, what is most interesting about Bahama Bucks is there's 3 owners. Well, really, there's more owners than that. So when I say there's 3 families, you've got Eric Lee, you've got my mom and dad, obviously, who are involved in the business, and then you've got myself and Kippy, my wife, who's involved in the business. So you also have this ownership team that is looking at, okay, we're divided up, and each of us take different sections of that. And so it's really an interesting category of saying, okay, you've got 3 owners who get along well, all understand their strengths. Excuse me, not 3, but 3 primary, the 3 heads of the families. And you look at it and say, okay, they all understand their strengths. They're very good at running in their lanes, and they know which hat to wear when. And so that, I would say, is probably one of the things I'm most proud of, is the early challenges we had as our roles as a leader. Eric and I are extremely different. He is so gifted at numbers. I mean, just a math whiz, can do it in his head. Great guy to have on a negotiating team because he's just so quick with numbers. And I'm more the, creative, and I'm more the inventor and things like that. But it takes both of us to package that together. My dad always brought the legal aspects to the things together, all the insurance aspects. So you had the black and whites there. And so us learning to work together and then spread that through all the directors has just been probably one of the best accomplishments we've done. Really just cool. By knowing when to yield and when to lead on certain things.
Where does vision fit in your mind, in your organization, and then maybe even just generally speaking for a leader? Like, what does vision mean to you? And how do you see your role in terms of vision, and what does that look like at Bahama Bucks, not just from your 10 directors, but then to your 55 central, and then your thousands of people across all your franchises? Like, what does that look like for you?
To us, it's paramount. And I'll tell you, like everyone did, the first thing I did when even COVID hit, right, when everything's shutting down and all that, the first thing we did, because we knew this was going to be monumental, is we looked at it and said, okay, what is our vision? What is our mission? Because if it only matters in the good times, it's not a great mission. It's not a great vision. And we said, and we just revisited it, and I pulled it out, and that was the first talk I gave to our directors and first talk I gave to our our teams, was I just opened up with our vision. Here's who we are. And our vision's real simple. It's to bless our guests by creating the ultimate tropical dessert experience. And in our shops and all across America, we say it just like this: be the blessing. We want to bless our guests. So if you look at an Avalanche crew member who works in a shop, all the way up to our directors and everybody else, everyone knows our vision. It's to bless our guests, because ultimately that's what we're about. We're really, people think we're in the snow business, and we're not. We're in the people business.
Right.
We've just learned how to love and serve people and how to do it with honor, dignity, and respect. And that's really been our charge through this last season. But what was nice is that had been our charge for years before this. And it was just a matter of going back to the vision and saying, okay, in hard times, we know we're about to walk through some stuff. We're going to ask people to pivot. We're going to change some things. Everything's going to go upside down just for a moment. How do we make sure we're all centered? And it was back to our vision. And so to us, it's the most important thing that anchors any company together, if you would.
From a communication standpoint, how often do you feel like you're intentionally communicating vision to that? Because that's a lot of people, especially the franchises. I mean, that's a lot of different franchise owners and maybe managers of those stores. I mean, you start going down the line, it's a lot of people. So do you have is there a method of your communication in terms of how often y'all are talking about vision and kind of pressing into that?
Absolutely. So that's where the partnership really, with Eric being a great numbers guy, low communicator, I'm the high communicator of all the owners and all that. So I love communication. It's my thing. So I'm proud that we have a full communications department, but me specifically, every Monday, I write a Monday Minute that goes to all the directors, that goes to our what we call our Snow Advisory Council, the 7 regions that are head of all the shops out there, and it gets passed through the whole system. Now, we are highly intentional about communication because a franchise family, there's constant communication. And from my desk alone, they're going to get, a pretty steady, meal of communication all the time. But you should see the buffet of communication we have. It's amazing. Everything from, weekly newsletters to videos, all the way down to the Avalanche crew. We're texting videos twice a week called the Daily Wave that just shows them how to do a better job at their jobs and stuff. So we really are, communication is one of the main priorities and main focuses at Bahama Bucks, just because that's one of your biggest unifying factors of any team is, do they know what's going on, and how do we react, how do we pivot, and those type of things.
That makes a lot of sense. How do you treat failure? Like when you think back over 30, 40 years of doing this, what's your approach to failure? How does it make you feel? Like, how do you learn from it? Like, what's your philosophy of failure?
At first, I got to tell you, as a young entrepreneur, it made me so mad. And you just want to sweep it under the table. And it's really interesting. We actually celebrate our failures at Bahama Bucks because we've learned, okay, had we not had these failures along the way, we would have never invented this great product, or we would have never found this new process. or this new idea how it is. And so, I still don't like them, but I'll say this, we embrace them because of what it's taught us, what we learned through it. And failure really is probably one of the key to our growth strategies, is because we've learned what doesn't work. And once you start eliminating that half, it's really a lot simpler to identify what works in your business and why. And so I think keeping track of those failures, and man, we've got a list of those. I mean, it's a mile long of all the failures, but it is something that we celebrate, and we've kind of learned to laugh at them and learn from them.
I love how you said failure is critical to your growth strategy. Certainly we've not been at it as long as you have at Bahama Bucks, but I can't think of a greater contributing factor other than our people to our growth besides learning from really dumb decisions. So it's good. Thanks for sharing that.
You bet.
How do you approach your own personal growth? I mean, you've got 2,500 people you're responsible for. You've got your 10 directors and everything in between. You have a lot of things pulling at you from finance perspective, just the whole layer of things that you have to deal with on a daily basis. So how do you approach personal growth?
For me, a lot of it is staying connected. One, I'm a big reader, so I'm always reading stuff and podcasts, love all that. But one of the things you do to stay connected is always be serving. Just serve in some capacity, because you learn so much from it. My wife and I, as of this last semester, our youngest just went off to college. So we're empty nesters, and it didn't take her 2 seconds to sign us up for college group. So now we're having kids over at the house, and we go to college group every Tuesday night. And now I've got more college kids in my house than I used to ever have. So part of it is, personal growth is just staying connected. And I think that's creating neat connections with different people. I'm privileged that I've got great mentors in my life as well. And I would say they've helped me along a lot of my personal growth. And, for me, you don't have to have a lot of mentors, but you've got to have, 1, 2, or 3 guys or people that can really pour into you and bring a lot of wisdom to you. And, I'd say Eric and I both were grateful for my father when he came on board, because he was really a passive owner for several years. But when he finally came on board, he was able to really mentor some young entrepreneurs and give us a lot of wisdom and help us avoid a lot of pitfalls early on. So that was really good.
Speaking of mentors, you mentioned your dad multiple times. Who or what have been some of the biggest influences on your leadership and just kind of this journey you've been on?
If you say who, obviously, love Pat Lencioni. Maxwell's got great stuff. There's just so many books you can read and all of that. On a personal level, I'm very close with our pastor, Chuck Angel, probably one of the best leaders I've seen do certain things in a different industry, obviously. I'm surrounded with good men. I've got great family members. But, there's always the aspect of a praying mom, who's constantly praying for her kids. And I'd say that's my mom. And, she's taught us to be grateful for everything, to always lead with humility. And she can certainly keep you grounded, And so I think we all have that. We may think we're great, but all you got to do is go home. Yeah. And mom's like, no, you're not that great.
That's really great. What's something you feel like maybe you've learned from your dad? I mean, he's had such a pivotal role in your life and has been a part of the business from very early. What are 1 or 2 things you feel like you've really learned from him that have helped shape your leadership?
One thing that it was not just my dad, but most of the Buchanan men and women, for that matter, they were just hard workers. Yeah. I mean, for instance, as a little guy, my dad just taught us to work really hard, and I've teased him forever because there were 3 words he would always utter to us. I mean, your car breaks down, and we'd call him at the office. He'd be like, "Figure it out." And so when we talk about that inventive personality, I think all my brothers and my sister too, we were just charged at an early age to figure it out. And so if I really look back on the past 30 years and the sweetness of the time I've had with my father and serving alongside him, that's his biggest attribute to really the company and to everyone else. Any problem that comes our way, he'll be the first to say, we can figure this out. Yeah, that's great. And so I think figure it out.
What a huge contribution.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that goes, you can see that that's like really rooted in in your story and your personality and your character, I mean, you started the whole podcast off by talking about tenacity, and really tenacity is nothing more than figure it out. And so, it seems like you really, really lived that and believed it. Last question for you. I always love this one. If you could speak to your younger self, what advice would you give yourself based on what you know now?
Wow. When I'm asked this in a different setting, a lot of times they always ask me this: what would you tell the young college students you're talking to, or something like that? I'm always like, man, marry well. Marry above your pay grade. It will change your life. And I did that. I married well. And I think as a young, if I go back to my 20-year-old self, probably the best advice I could say is just pace yourself. We're in such a hurry all the time, and I'm that guy too, where I just can't seem to get enough done in the week and all of that. But you got to have a little space for grace in your life, because you're going to make some mistakes. But one thing that my wife Kippy and I have always talked about is, one thing we've done well is we have savored the moments. Because even when we were, poor, we were broke, but we weren't broken. I mean, those are some of the sweetest times we've had with our kids. We had the best time. Because you're learning how to play board games, you throwed rocks, and you played with sidewalk chalk, and those type of things. And so we really savor the moment wherever we are. And so I think that's what I'd tell myself is pace yourself and savor the moments. Okay. Don't let it race by, because it's such a sweet journey.
It's a great way to end the podcast. Thanks, awesome. Blake, very much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you so much.